Hello to all the debt warriors listening, and welcome back to another episode of Millennial Debt Domination. I'm your host, Katie Fata. January 30th marks the beginning of Identity Theft Awareness Week. The goal of the week is to spread awareness that any type of theft can disrupt your finances, credit history, and reputation, and take money and time to resolve. The Federal Trade Commission estimates about 9 million people have their identities stolen each year. Identity theft affects about 1 in 20 Americans each year. Do you know how to spot identity theft and how to protect yourself from becoming a victim? If not, don't worry, because today I'll be discussing just that. Today, I'll be joined by Erich Kron. Erich is a security awareness advocate and technical evangelist at KnowBe4. KnowBe4 is a provider of the world's largest security awareness training and simulated phishing platform that helps you manage the ongoing problem of social engineering. Erich knows just what to do to protect yourself from identity theft and what to do if you're a victim. Today, Erich and I will be discussing just that, in addition to how thieves steal your identity, child identity theft resources, and much more. Now, let's get to my interview with Erich. Hi, Erich. Thanks for being on the podcast today.
It is great to be here.
Yeah, so we haven't talked anything about identity theft really yet on the podcast. So this is a great episode, and I'm excited to have you on as my guest.
Awesome. I hope that people can take some information away from this and use it themselves, because it's becoming such a big problem.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm definitely excited to bring some awareness to it. So to get started, how about we talk about what information makes up a person's identity?
Excellent. That's a great question. And it's funny when you look at what we call PII, or personally identifiable information. That's kind of the gist of it. But different states qualify different things in different ways. But ultimately, what it boils down to is we're looking at the major things: your name, your address, tax IDs or social security numbers, and phone numbers, and all that stuff that can be used to identify you as an individual. And this is stuff that really needs to be protected, right? So even though a lot of times we think about stuff like, what are they going to do with my name and address? And yes, some of that is available actually out there in public records sometimes. But that information can still be used against you by scammers and people like that in the cybercrime world actually go and try to find this information. The key ones, though, is almost always the social security number. You really want to keep an eye on that.
Yeah, that's definitely a good to know. So don't bring the card with you places and such. Would you?
Right. And if you have an option, this is what people don't realize. Sometimes, even when you're at the doctor's office, it'll say social security number, but it's optional. So why put it on another piece of paper if they really don't need it?
No, yeah, I definitely agree with you there. So now that we've determined what makes up a person's identity, so what is identity theft, and about how many Americans have their identity stolen each year?
Yeah, it can be a lot of different things. Identity theft is kind of like an umbrella statement for some things, but the most common type of identity theft actually deals with stealing government benefits. And that's like filing fake tax returns, different kinds of things like that, unemployment insurance, things like that happen a lot. So they'll take these important things that basically identify who you are electronically in a lot of cases, and they'll try to go after these benefits on their own. So we see this with, in the older generations, we see this with medical type stuff. It's really a lot of different things like that. But, the most common type, again, is the government benefit theft. And there's a document I found with the FTC, and they were saying in 2020, there were over 1.3 million reports of identity theft. Mm-hmm. And that's just reported. A lot of people don't even report it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so that is true. And then, stealing all benefits and unemployment and everything. So why do people find it necessary to steal someone's identity?
Well, they may have bad credit. They may have issues like that. Or maybe they're going to use something in a nefarious way. Or, like maybe they're going to open a credit card account in someone else's name, get all the stuff, and then obviously it gets shut down, but somebody's responsible for that. And sometimes it'll land on the people who are the victims of that. And it's a nightmare. I mean, if you've ever had false charges come through,
Ugh.
one or two is not the end of the world, but when somebody actually steals your identity and does a whole bunch of stuff, it can get really, really ugly, especially when
Yeah.
it comes to like your income tax returns.
Yeah. 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 That's true. So, and then how do they steal someone's identity?
So, some of the most common ways that this happens these days is information leaked from like data breaches, right? So, I do cybersecurity. I hear about these breaches all the time and we read about them in the news. Sometimes we get notifications, hey, your information was stolen again,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. But a lot of times that stuff will get stolen from there. Another thing that these bad actors really love to do is trick people into filling out fake forms that have a lot of personal information. So
Mm.
it looks like you're applying for something or you're filling out something, and it's going to ask you for sensitive things like your address and like your social security number. That's always just such a big red flag.
Mm-hmm.
And last but not least, and this is so unfortunate, and it especially happens with kids, is family members will actually take the documents, your actual birth certificate
Mm.
or passport, and use that to do different things.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's to get, the electricity turned on in a house without putting down a deposit. Maybe their credit score is so bad that
Mm.
they need to use their kid's identity.
Mm.
Unfortunately, that happens a lot.
Yeah. And you just kind of mentioned you would want to steal someone's credit to, steal someone's identity, sorry, to use their credit line and everything. So that's one thing that these can do with your personal information. What else can they do with your personal information?
I mean, they can get fake IDs. They can sell things in your name.
Okay.
It's odd in social media a lot of times. Like, for example, Facebook and stuff. I'll give you a quick story here.
Yeah.
Had a friend of mine. She very well known in our community. She was a teacher at one of the local churches. All this kind of stuff. 3,000 something connections on Facebook. Somebody got into her account, and one of the things they did is they have a picture of her driver's license now. And what they did is they changed the information you use to get your account back. So the email, the phone number, and all that. They changed all that. And then they started selling puppies. So these puppies, they would put them up for sale. People would pay with Cash App. And then, of course, they would never get the puppies. For people that were questioning it, they actually sent them a picture of her driver's license that they got somehow. Well, it's been reported to Facebook, but when you report things like that to Facebook, they say you need to prove who you are. They just send them that picture of the driver's license. And so the scam went on for like 7 months.
Oh, wow.
That they were, even though it's being reported, even though there was a police report out there, because they had that driver's license, they were just able to take over that account and keep it going.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. And, that is a great example of identity theft and how you can use a fake ID. And you can also, use it to steal credit money. Does identity theft only have to do with stealing money or credit, or like what else can people steal from you?
No, and it's not always about stealing from you. Okay.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier, sometimes parents don't have
yeah.
good enough credit for, getting the electricity turned on without a huge deposit. Okay. I get that. But there's also sometimes for getting jobs, right? So to get a job here, there have to be these background checks a lot of times, it's required by the government. So for convicts, sometimes they don't want to let people know that they're a convict, right? So they're going to use someone else's ID. Also for undocumented workers, things like that, people that don't happen to have all the paperwork they need or a history that they need to get work. That happens quite often where people will use their information to sign up for the jobs, and they're at least able to get the paychecks and stuff out of that.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That makes sense. So you kind of talked earlier about how you see all these data breaches and everything since you work for cybersecurity. So what are some common types of identity frauds, that people should be aware of?
Yeah, I mentioned before the government documents or benefits fraud is top, fake unemployment insurance and tax returns, stuff like that. That's like top of the list per the
Yeah.
FTC. But then the credit card fraud comes after that. And that's people opening new lines of credit in your name and then buying a bunch of stuff and then, skipping out on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then also loan or lease fraud was not far behind. So maybe somebody has terrible credit or, they're going to do something bad in a house. They're going to lease it under someone else's names, I mean, think about it. If you're going to be if you're going to be renting a house or leasing a house or a property to make meth, hey, are you going to do it in your name?
Right.
Probably not, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's so many different things to be aware of.
Right.
That's why I'm so glad we're kind of doing this episode to let everybody know. So now that we've kind of dived into identity theft, different types of it, how can we avoid becoming a victim of identity theft?
Yeah, there's some things that we have to think about a little bit more. And for some of the younger generations that are used to posting a lot of information out there, unfortunately, that can be used against us. So be careful what we post online, especially on social media, right? Don't ever post a picture of your terrible driver's license picture with the whole driver's license there, right? I see that happen sometimes. I've seen people say, hey, here's my first debit card, right? And, oh my goodness. You want to shake your head about that sometimes, but people are excited about that, right? And if you're ever asked to provide sensitive information in an online form, double check up there in that URL bar. Make sure it's like really the site you think you're at, that you didn't get tricked into going somewhere else and giving them all this information. So make sure you're at the legitimate website. And I'll tell you this, it's a cheesy saying, but I always like to say, when in doubt, chicken out. Contact the company. If you're filling out something, contact the company, the organization, and say, hey, is this really your website? And they'll be able to tell you if it's legit.
Yeah, no, that's definitely good advice. And, we were just talking about making sure, you have a secure website. So identity theft does happen online, correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you think it's more common for it to happen online nowadays with social media and stuff?
I think it happens a lot because of not just social media, but email and, for different generations, obviously use email a lot more, but it's still super common for email phishing to get people to give up this information, right? Around COVID time, we saw a lot of stuff where there's these government programs to help out businesses and stuff like that. Well, there are a lot of fakes going out too that said, hey, go enroll here and, we'll send you money and we're going to help and all this. So people would go and they'd fill out that information and, obviously it's not real. There was even one where it went around and it said, this was information about COVID when it first came out, and it was a link to what they said was the WHO website, right? The World Health Organization. But it took you to a site and it said, to confirm your identity, we need you to enter this information so we can give you the information, right? And the government is never going to make you confirm stuff to get potentially life-saving information, but people don't think about that. And they go ahead and do it. So lots of ways to do it there. I would say more often than not these days, it's more common to happen online than in person.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And especially I feel like a lot of people I know and me personally have been getting so many emails lately from Netflix or from something. And then you got to look in the actual sender and it's like not legitimate at all. But it makes me scared for people like my grandparents and stuff. They don't know to look, but yeah, that's crazy. A lot of things are definitely going around right now with that. So, be aware of your email, of course. And then, so earlier we kind of talked about children and their identity theft being stolen. And I didn't know this. I looked this up before, and it is such a high percentage of children who are getting their identity stolen. So how can someone protect their child from becoming a victim?
Yeah. So the real draw to actually stealing children's identity is they may not use that for years to get their own credit report. Yeah. So it goes undetected for a really long time. So there's a lot of value to that for these bad actors. But ultimately, remember, for children, one of the best things you can do is educate them. Make them sure they understand that people want to try to get them to give up this information. Maybe they're on a phone call and somebody's wanting them to give them their social security number to confirm something, Or maybe it's in an app, even for games. We've seen stuff like that
Mm.
happen where fake games are out there and they're supposed to enter that information. And there's
Oh.
these great stories. They're called pretexts, but great stories to get the kids to believe, oh, I just need to verify who I am to play this game. They don't realize that people are after this information. So you want to double check and make sure they understand that. You can also check with the major credit bureaus and see if your kid already has a report created. So what happens is we start off with no credit report as a
Right.
kid.
Yeah.
And then most of the time when we start to get our first credit accounts, like when we're 18 or so, that's when a report is actually generated. Well, if you get a hold of these credit bureaus and there's already a credit report generated for your kid, that's a pretty big red flag. So you want to be engaging in conversations with those reporting agencies at that point and probably freezing their credit report as well. So that's another big thing that you can do to keep an eye on that is to freeze those reports if they're in place.
Yeah, I feel like it would be almost hard to see if it's happening to your child because they don't use that stuff on a regular basis like we do. So
Yeah,
I feel
and
like it
more
could
and
be
more though,
hard.
these credit bureaus are getting used to people going ahead and contacting them and say, "Hey, I'm checking this out for my kid," because they know what's going on.
Mm.
So don't feel bad contacting the credit bureaus and
Yeah.
just say, "Hey, you know what? I want to make sure that my kids are good." And then also, like I said, make sure those important documents are locked up so people aren't taking that the passport or birth certificate down and signing up for things or getting IDs and such with that.
Yeah, that's definitely some good ways to protect your child from identity theft. But what happens if your child's a victim of identity theft? What should someone do?
Right, right. So it's first of all, it's such a bad feeling. I mean, I know people that have gone through this kind of thing. So it's just a bad feeling. First thing you want to do is take a deep breath and go, okay, we can work through this. I mean, we understand that this is not new anymore and that there are things in place. So the first steps is contact the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. Identitytheft.gov is their website. So you can make a report right there. Also, call your local police to make a report as well. You know, in that situation that I gave you with my friend on Facebook and those dogs being sold, if you when they send that picture of the driver's license, it has her address on it. People were physically showing up at her home
Oh,
going,
okay.
I paid you, where's my dog? Right. I
Mm.
mean, it became a physical threat. And so having a police report on hand to say, look, this has been reported, that can be very helpful. If accounts were open in the kid's name, contact those organizations with the credit accounts. So like the creditors that gave out the cards or whatever, they're going to get you in touch with their fraud department, and they know how to deal with this. They'll shut it down. And then also contact the major credit bureaus and let them know what happened. So it may show up on Experian, but you may not have something show up on either of the other two big ones. So contact them all and say, hey, let's watch out for this. Because obviously they had enough information to get it at one. Why wouldn't they be trying to do it in other places as well?
Right, exactly. And we kind of talked about with the kids, it could be hard to tell if they're a victim
Yeah.
of identity theft because they don't check their credit. So how do you know if your kid or even yourself is a victim of it?
Yeah. A lot of times people, the first thing that kind of tips them off is they start getting phone calls from collection agencies, right? They're going, hey, you need to pay this bill. And they're going, what bill is that? So that's the first tip off for a lot of people. And of course, that's a little unsettling. You spend a lot of time and effort trying to figure that out. Also, we see it all the time in the cybercrime world, where people will go to file their income taxes and they get a message from the IRS going, no, this has already been filed. And that's a big problem, but a real eye opener. There's also a lot of times people will see letters from banks about denied accounts or even new ones because they'll come to your own address. Sometimes that's part of the credit report. So sometimes they'll end up coming to your house and it's saying, well, why did this account get denied? I don't remember even applying for it. That's a big red flag right there to check it out.
Right. And we talked about what we could do with your kids if they, alert the credit bureaus and everything. What else should an adult do? Is there anything in addition to that they should do if their identity has been stolen?
There's the credit monitoring services, which are handy, but there's some things you can do also. You can freeze your credit for all of the credit bureaus for free.
Yeah.
It becomes inconvenient if you're trying to open a new account, but it's actually easy to call and unfreeze it. But if you think about it, how often do you actually do credit checks?
Yeah.
So why just leave it open there all the time for somebody else to be able to do these checks without you ever knowing it?
Right. Yeah, right. And then you mentioned credit, and obviously if your identity is stolen and then do open a new line of credit or something, your credit can be greatly affected by it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you definitely want to keep an eye on it and alert your credit company and the bureaus and everything. So we talked about how children are such a big target for identity theft. Is there any other age group or person that's more, susceptible to it than others?
Yeah. So clearly, kids are the most common target, especially for parents or family members or something for the reasons we talked about.
Right.
But in that FTC document that I've looked at, I thought it was interesting because what they found is, at least in 2020, the people between the ages of 30 and 39 were the most likely to be targeted or have their identity stolen, followed by the 40 to 49 crowd. So a little bit on the older side. But if you think about it, they probably have more assets and better credit already built up for them to steal or for them to take advantage of. Same thing with getting the fake tax returns and such. Those are the folks that have the money. The younger people, I remember when I was in my 20s, I didn't exactly have a strong bank account, right? So there's only so much you can take. So they seem to be going after the older folks who may have more of a nest egg. It's like scammers. They love going after elderly folks who had their life savings, and their life savings is more substantial than something that's going to get you, an extra value meal at your nearby fast food place.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. I thought it would be a lot older, like around, because they might not realize at all. I thought they would probably be like more, but
the older generations don't use electronics the way
that's
we do.
True.
And so, those attacks are a lot harder to do. If you think about it, when we look at scams and stuff that are being done online these days, getting into that business is actually very inexpensive and easy to do compared to scamming people one at a time. So for people that are online all the time, it's a lot easier to contact those folks than it is individuals that don't do the internet stuff much.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, now that the original age group, the 30 to 40 to 49, that makes perfect sense. So yeah, definitely. So if someone, is targeted by an identity thief, are there like certain resources that are available for them? Because I'm sure it's super scary for them right away. Like, where can they go immediately for help?
So like I mentioned, identitytheft.gov is actually a really good place to go. There's places you can do the reporting. They can give you tips. Also, there's another site. It's an organization that I used to be on their advisory board, and I love what they do. It's at fightcybercrime.org. And that's not just identity theft, but scams, romance scams. They give you tips, tricks, how to do that. If you've lost money because somebody suckered you into wiring money out, they tell you how to quickly get in there and try to offset those so you can save your money. I love the organization behind fightcybercrime.org. So I highly recommend that as another great resource.
Yeah, and I'll link that in the description of this podcast as well, as long as as also the identitytheft.gov, so people can get that information there if they need it. So can someone get their money back if their identity is stolen and they use a bunch of money from their credit and everything? Is it possible?
Sometimes, yeah. And it's interesting how it works. There's no promises, but different things offer different protection. Right. So, for example, if you can prove that this wasn't you that opened this account, a lot of times the creditors have to kind of eat that. That's just the doing business costs these days. But credit cards often offer better protection than, say, debit cards. That's why I tell people, if you're paying at the pump for your gas, use a credit card, because if it gets skimmed there, if somebody steals your credit card information, you're generally better protected than with debit cards. And even worse than that these days are the online payment services. They're very handy for some things like Cash App or, Zelle, or even the PayPal friends and family, where you can send people money for no fee on either side. Those are great. except they offer you zero protection for victims of fraud. So if somebody gets into these accounts and, starts doing stuff, you're pretty much out there on your own.
Huh. Yeah, no, that's true. That's a good point to make. Yeah, because they are so helpful, these things online, these apps, but be careful with it.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, no, definitely. And then, I think there's also something called financial fraud. Could you maybe go over what that is and how is it different from identity theft?
I mean, identity theft can be used for, stealing basically who you are, your persona, if you will, which has things like credit scores and credit cards and stuff like that, tied to it. But financial fraud, at least the way that I've always dealt with it and thought of it, is stuff that's specific to getting money from people. Okay. Whether it's actually doing the fake credit accounts, things like that. That's more in the stuff that's specific to that. But there's a lot of bad things that happen to people without them just trying to steal money, right? There's enough of that going around. So those scams, those things that are in the financial side, are obviously really just tied to the cash, but not the end of the story for sure.
Yeah. So regardless, just like make sure you're watching yourself online and everything and be vigilant. And I think you've answered all of my questions about identity theft. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
I am happy to be here. I really hope this helps some people kind of think about it a little bit more. I mean, these people that we're dealing with that engage in this identity theft stuff, these folks are these are not like we always think of the kids in the basement, drinking Mountain Dew, eating pizzas as these hackers or these thieves. They're actually so much more organized, and these cyber criminals these days, this is huge business. I mean, they may steal your identity, but they don't use it. Instead, they sell it on the dark web to other people who then use it for bad things, right? There is a whole marketplace for this stuff down there too. So these are advanced players. They know what they're doing. Please don't be overconfident and think, oh, I can always pick when somebody's trying to, to trick me in a text or anything, because they're just way better than that, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah. They're professionals, especially nowadays with the internet and everything.
Oh,
so I mean, be mindful. And especially if you have kids, be mindful of them and social media. And I feel like every kid has like a tablet nowadays. So just be mindful of that. Definitely.
Yeah. The problem we have is that a lot of people, they misunderstand the younger generations. And this is nothing against the younger generations, but you guys were born into using these devices. You're very comfortable in these user interfaces, moving around, doing things like that. And so people assume you all know everything about cybersecurity when really that's not how this works. And I think a lot of people, they don't talk about it much because they just assume, oh, these people are so good with electronics and computers. They know all this stuff. But honestly, there's some pretty tricky folks out there and they do some sneaky stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So just be aware, and thank you for being on on the podcast today. I definitely learned a lot, and I think the listeners will too. So I greatly appreciate it.
Oh, happy to be here. I'm glad to offer services whenever I can.
Yeah, thank you. It's easier than you think to have your identity stolen. Identity thieves will steal your information in order to gain access to any benefits you have, obtain your credit, make a fake ID out of your information, and much more. In order to avoid becoming a victim of identity theft, you want to make sure any place you put your personal information, online or in person, is safe. If you're putting your information online, make sure you have a secure connection and that the website you're using is legitimate. Not only do you need to protect yourself from identity theft, you also need to keep an eye out for your children if you have any. Since they have no credit, identity thieves target them and start credit in their name. If you or your child has been a victim of identity theft, contact your local police, the 3 credit bureaus, and freeze your credit. I'll also link some of the resources in the description of this podcast you can use if you find yourself a victim of identity theft. With that being said, that wraps up another episode of Millennial Debt Domination. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please rate and review us there. I'll talk to you next time, millennials, Gen Zers, and everyone else listening. Bye.